Alright, welcome to part 7 of the Animal Combo Project. So in this tutorial I'm going to cover how to create the shadow here at the bottom. I'm not going to get into shading on the inside of the animal yet. We're going to save that for a later tutorial. I always think it's good to kind of ground the animal first and then do some shading on the inside. I am working with the light direction, which you can see is going across here. So the shadow is pretty accurate, I think, or pretty close in terms of representation. I'm going to turn it off by clicking on the visibility here, and we're going to start fresh. So what I'm going to do is the thumbnail here, and if I right click here, I can choose large thumbnails. So if you don't see that on yours, you can do that in the gray. I'm going to control click or command click the thumbnail to make it into a selection here. You can see it here as a selection. And then I'm going to add a new layer by clicking the new layer icon next to the trash can. At that point, I can fill in that layer with whatever color I want. So I'm going to use the paint bucket over here. Sometimes the gradient tool will be visible, so it's with that one. It's the G key is the hotkey, and then you can hit Shift G to kind of rotate through these. So Shift G will kind of rotate, and it's the second one that's in here, the paint bucket. And with the paint bucket selected, I can hold the Alt key or Option key on the Mac and select some color in the scene here of the actual photograph. So I'm selecting the shadow in here, the darkest part, and then I'm going to double click my color picker here, and I'm going to pick something a little bit darker and a little bit more saturated. So I'm going to move a little bit more to the right here and then click OK, because it is closer to the foreground the shadow would be. So it'd be a little more saturated, a little darker. So I'm going to go ahead and click in here. And then once that's done, I can hit Control D or Command D to deselect. That's in the select menu here, right here, Control D. So, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect this layer so that I can constantly free transform it. So I'm going to right click on it and go down to, or up to Convert to Smart Object. Again, that's like a protective envelope. So now I'm going to hit Control T, and then in here I'm going to right click and go down to where it says Flip Vertical. And what that'll do is it'll literally flip it upside down perfectly so that I can skew it off to the side here. So there is a skew option here, so I'm actually going to bring this up here and right click and go down to skew. And what you can do is just grab this corner here and kind of drag out like that. You can even move it over and skew it even more. So I really want to exaggerate this kind of skewing effect. So I'm going to kind of pull it out a couple of times and then start to bring it down here. This looks pretty close to where I want it to be. And if you get in the way here, you can always hit Control minus or Command minus on the Mac to kind of zoom out as you're in free transform mode. So I'm going to kind of line up something like that. That looks pretty good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click in here and go to warp to give it a little more warpage. And I'm going to right click again and go to split warp crosswise. And I can click on a point here like this one here, and I can kind of bend and move that shadow wherever I want. So I'm kind of thinking just kind of bending over a little bit. I'm going to put another one over here, so I'm going to right click and go to split warp crosswise, and again I'm going to click right here and then just kind of move that over so it kind of bends downwards, something like that. That's kind of a nice slope there. I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter or return on Mac. I can also click the little checkbox up here. Same thing. And what I want to make sure I do is put the shadow layer below the other layer, the animal combo layer. I could then rename it if I want. So I double click on it, call it shadow. And then I can take a little closer look at it. So I'm going to zoom in here. Usually you have to do some fine touches here. So I'm going to kind of try and with the move tool just kind of nudge it, and it might not line up perfectly, and that's okay. You can also use your arrow keys to kind of nudge, so I'm kind of just nudging them a little bit, and I notice this one lines up pretty good, but this one doesn't. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into free transform mode again by hitting Control T or Command T on the Mac, and then right click and choose warp, and then right click and choose split warp crosswise again. So I'm going to click here on this shadow and kind of literally pull it up. So I'm going to kind of grab some of these points and kind of just shove it up. And it looks like it's almost connected now. There we go. A little finessing. Sometimes you end up spending a little more time than you expect on the little shadow. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and click enter return. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the opacity of that shadow. So I'm going to drop the opacity here. I don't want it to be completely opaque like that. And then what I can do is I can add a little bit of blur. So it is a smart object, which is great. So I'm going to go to filter and go to blur, and I like to choose the Gaussian blur here, and crank it up to whatever value you like. This seemed to value to work pretty well at 2.3. The default's like 1, it just wasn't enough. If you go too far, you're going to get a real soft fuzzy shadow, and then the animal will kind of pop out a little bit too much. So I think it was around 2.2 or 2.3. That looks actually pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. This part here still doesn't quite look right, so I'm going to do one more time. Again, this is what's great about smart objects, is I can always free transform it. So I'm going to hit Control T, and then it said, give me the warning that the filter would go away temporarily, and that's okay. Click Warp again, and it looks like, it just feels like it needs to be nudged up a little bit. There's something here. There we go. Now I get that feeling I was connected more there. So I'm going to go ahead and select Enter there, and then the filter should be applied after that. So you can kind of see the effect, the before and after, just turning that on and off, the Gaussian blur. Now let's go ahead and zoom out. So that looks pretty good. So that, in a nutshell, is how to create a cast shadow using the animal itself in Adobe Photoshop. Until next time, see you soon in Photoshop. Cheers.